All right, we're going to do an autopsy here on the San Francisco 49ers. We've done this with a lot of teams when they've been eliminated and going through the cause of death and what the future looks like with Niners today. So, Sam, cause of death for last year's NFC champion, San Francisco 49ers.
Tricky one. Is it just the injuries? Because other teams have overcome those injuries. Like teams that were supposed to be, contenders, Super Bowl teams, like Detroit. Detroit has had a laundry list of players, all on defense. And we're saying that's kind of almost more damaging when you really concentrate the injuries on specific areas. Detroit has been as banged up as anybody, and they're 14 wins. They're a win away from being a 15-win number one seed in the NFC. San Francisco, and they just beat the 49ers. San Francisco has had injuries, but no, I don't think it's A, not as many, and B, some of them have come back, and they've just been reeling from it.
Is it just Jake Moody?
Jake Moody's a big part of it. I mean, maybe that draft class where they drafted a bunch of people in the third round, all of whom stink, that probably didn't help.
I mean, that's
drafting period. Is that the root of all this?
So I'll say, I'll blame the injuries. I also don't know how you properly blame. It's a very similar season to the Bengals, where if you go back and flip a couple plays, and I don't mean to do this to like diminish them, but like if you flip a couple plays, they're 10-6. I mean, obviously more than a couple, but they're very close to 10-6. And that would be a disappointment, but certainly not a 6-10 disappointment. But yeah, they had the 2023 draft and the 2022 draft.
Yeah.
Didn't have a first rounder. The 23 draft, they didn't pick until pick 87, where they picked Jair Brown. He's played a lot of football, but he's been okay. Jake Moody was the third round pick that year. D. Winters is playing some football for them, like playing football, right? They're all on the field and contributing, but they're not getting a whole lot of contribution from either the 22 or 23 draft class, other than Brock Purdy.
Or really, I mean, so that's the thing. You can probably go back. There's 3 years worth of drafting, right? 23, 22, 21. 21, you've got Lenore, who plays for them.
Lenore and Aaron Banks. You have two
Aaron
starters.
Banks is not good, though.
Starter.
That's not necessarily a positive thing, though. Like, my point is, they haven't got anybody making a positive contribution to the team outside of Lenore and Brock Purdy in effectively the last 3 drafts. The draft is a crapshoot. Nobody bats 1,000. I don't know what percentage that is, but it's very low.
I mean, so I'm not trying to like doom and gloom on the Lions' future or anything like that. I would never do such things. But go back to the Niners. If you look at their 18 and 19 draft classes, in 18 they get McGlinchey in the first round to play right tackle, Fred Warner in the third, who becomes the best linebacker in the NFL. The next year, Nick Bosa, Deebo Samuel, Drake Greenlaw in round 5.
Yeah.
And so how did they become so good? Well, they, hit on some of these. They got a top 3 edge and what Deebo is, the best linebacker. So they hit this run, and then they hit a lull, right? And then the lull takes a couple of years, but it's really tough. It starts to deplete the depth a little bit. And I do believe that's where the Niners are. They became very star-centric, and it's difficult to always add stars in the draft year after year.
Yeah, and I think so. What's an interesting comp to me, because obviously the year that stands out is that 2023 season where they didn't have a draft pick before the third round, but then they had 3 of them to end that round and had 3, 6, 7, 9 picks overall, right? That's a very Los Angeles Rams style of draft, where remember the Rams for FDM picks, they traded away all their top picks but they always left themselves with a lot of picks, period. So if you look at some of these Rams drafts where they didn't have a first rounder or didn't have particularly a lot of high picks, 2023, Steve Avila was their top pick in the second round, but they then in the third had Byron Young, Kobe Turner in the third, Puka Nacua in the fifth. They got players out of that draft. 2022, they got Kyron Williams in that draft. 2021, Tutu Atwell, Ernest Jones. Like, they kept finding players that were making useful contributions in these lower rounds, whereas the 49ers, when they left themselves, like those 3 third-round picks, none of whom have made a positive impact. And Jake Moody actually has had a significant negative impact by being a bad kicker, not just being not a good kicker. Like if Jake Moody had been an undrafted kicker, he wouldn't have a job anymore. They would have already gotten rid of him. It's only because they drafted him in the third round they've persisted with a guy who's missing kicks, and that's had like a compounding problem to the thing. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a combination of acute injuries this year, which were massively problematic, and 3 or 4 years of bad drafting consecutively.
The depth, I think, definitely got attacked. And look, I said that in the preseason. If you look at their defensive line, remember what their defensive line looked like last year with Nick Bosa, and then they, were bringing in Chase Young and and it was like they don't need anybody else. They keep bringing dudes in, right? And they were loaded on the defensive line. They still had Eric Armstead last year. They were loaded. This year, they were more depleted. It was like, hey, it's Nick Bosa, it's Javon Hargrave, and a whole bunch of complementary pieces like Leonard Floyd. And then when you get banged up there, still, you felt it across the roster, right?
Yeah, I mean, they did. They had the nightmare scenario for a period. They lost Javon Hargrave and Nick Bosa, who were the two players that were basically the entirety of that defensive line's presence. And all of a sudden, Leonard Floyd, who was your third pass rusher, ends up having to lead the line for a while. And you're like, well, that takes you from one of the better pass rushers in the NFL, pass rushes, to one of the worst immediately. Having said that, the Lions had the same thing happen to them, and they're still a 14-win team vying for the number 1 seed. Like, the problem the 49ers have is that the sort of direct comparison with all those injuries are Detroit, and Detroit weathered them fine.
Looking forward, this is what's going to be interesting here because, again, just to recite, top 3 player at several different positions: tight end, left tackle, running back, receiver. Ayuk and Samuel say like 2 top 15 guys, wherever you want to put them, right? They have, I just counted and forgot. 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, 8 plus players making over 10 million APY. Just like to use that as like a basic cutoff, and a few of them over 20, a few of them over 30. They have Javon Hargrave, Dre Greenlaw, Travarius Ward, all as potential free agents here. Hargrave and Ward already making pretty good money, and Greenlaw in line to just to get paid here. Interesting decisions going forward because they've been able to pay these guys because of their QB situation, having Brock Purdy on almost no money. So now they've got this decision. If we re-sign Brock Purdy, it's a lot harder to keep some of that talent in-house.
Yeah, it is. They do have a ton of cap space, though. Like, I don't think this is a team that, not a ton, but they have a decent chunk. Like, they're not up against it. We've been sort of making this point for a while. Like, when they were drawing out the Brandon Ayuk deal for so long, it's like, yeah, it's going to be a lot of money, but it's not like you can't afford it, even budgeting for a Brock Purdy contract coming down the line. Like, you can get this done. Everything's going to get harder if you give Brock Purdy a giant sum of money. But you're not like up against the wall financially. Brock Purdy will probably, wipe out most of their cap space immediately. But you still have a decent chunk there to be able to work with. Like, this is not a team that immediately, I think, falls apart the second they give Brock Purdy a contract extension.
And so, as I say with every team, as soon as you pay the quarterback, well, you have to draft well.
Yeah.
And so I only brought up the Lions as like, hey, I don't mean to like doom and gloom the future. As great as Brad Holmes has been, and as great as they've been drafting, can you always bank on that going forward? Because there's this history of the Saints, 2017 and classes around that were unbelievable and incredible. Then it stopped. The Seattle draft classes that led to the Legion of Boom, we bring that up. And then John Schneider hit a lull. And the Niners, you could say, hey, they went through this stretch where they're adding all of this incredible talent. You hit on these mid-rounders. You hit on Fred Warner. Great find. Does that mean you're great at it? Or, you hit that stretch. You hit the good stretch. Can a team like the Lions build on that? You can't always bank on bringing in, 4 or 5 impact players per draft. It's just not there historically. So, but the Niners have to get back to at least drafting well, adding depth, and it's more crucial now as Brock Purdy's pending.
Yeah, they don't need to bounce back and have, one of those all-time saving drafts again. They just need to stop having ones where they get nothing. Like, you can't have a draft where you get 7, 8, 9 draft picks and have literally no positive contribution from it. That can't happen. You don't need to bat 1,000 in the draft. You do need to bat like 300. You do need to have just, one of every 3 picks needs to be something useful for this team. Otherwise, we're getting nothing out of all these draft picks. And those are the ones that save the money, right? Like, when you are suddenly squeezed against the salary cap, hitting on a guy, particularly outside of the first round, hitting on any kind of draft pick that has a non-first round contract is a massive cash saving against the salary cap.
And by the way, it was, I don't know, somebody brought this up. Like, I don't know why this had to be announced, but it was announced that John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan will return for next year with the 49ers. Like, they've done a great job, right? I'm not trying to diminish, what the drafts the last couple of years. As I've said a million times on this show, when Kyle Shanahan has had a starter, it's been NFC Championship or bust. What was that stat that you showed me? They've either not made the playoffs or made it to the NFC Championship.
Yep.
Basically for 25 straight years, whatever it is. Incredible. And this is, since 2017 when they took over, an incredible run here by the Niners. And we do get caught up sometimes in just ring or no ring and that's it, rather than the sustained success. Like, would you say Andy Reid did a good job in Philadelphia? Would you say the Bills did a good job when they kept losing in the Super Bowl? Yeah, like, that's good. Sustained success. The Niners are there. This is a down season between injuries and the depth catching up. So now they've got a chance to – they still have star power, but they have to start hitting on the mid-tier of that roster.
I do think, though, that's one of the most difficult things institutionally in all of sports to determine is for teams that keep getting to good but not great levels, or teams that keep coming up short in, knockout games, knockout stages of competition across all sports, forget just football, but anything at the moment. At what point, how do you evaluate that? Do you say we have reached the pinnacle of the sport where generally we're in the top 1% here, and at that stage the margins are so thin that it's probably not going to bounce your way every year. In fact, it's probably going to bounce not your way every year, and simply knocking on this door is the most important thing. If we keep knocking on this door, eventually we'll get through, so don't change anything, let's just keep going, right? Or do you say consistently failing at this level represents a ceiling, represents a flaw, and the only way of getting above this level is to address the flaw, which will open up the risk that we get a lot worse, because we're in the top 1%, but the only way of getting to the top 0%, to the apex, is by changing something major, and most of the time that's probably going to make us worse. So, and the problem is, in each one of these instances, so I would generally say the better thing is to keep knocking on the door, and eventually it'll go your way. But the problem is, in the NFL, you've got, for the last 25 years, the Patriots and the Chiefs to make a mockery of that suggestion. That, it's not actually that hard to just change something, get the right combination, and then you win every year. It means suddenly if you're Buffalo with your 4 straight Super Bowls, you look like an idiot, because it's clearly you were doing it wrong, because the Patriots are able to rock up and go to a Super Bowl every other year and win most of them. It's not hard to do. You just need to change the thing, get the right situation. So I do think it's really difficult for any of these teams that consistently get pretty far but seem to come up just short to know what is the solution to that. What is the pathway from there? Do you fix things, or do you say, no, actually this represents good process. Let's just hope the luck changes.
Yeah, I mean, I would stick to knocking on the door. The Patriots and Chiefs are difficult to compare to, I would say.
Right, but ultimately that is the standard.
And the quarterback situation is the biggest driver there, right, for both of those teams. And then you have a team in the division like the Rams who made that aggressive move a couple years ago and went from Jared Goff, who's good, and we see him being good and still being good, but they said we needed better, and for that run it worked with Stafford. But I think Lynch and Shanahan have certainly earned a lot more time to fix it, and if they do get to knock on the door again, I don't think there's anything that says that they can't win a Super Bowl. So I think the Niners will bounce back. Got to do better in the draft. I think they'll pay Brock Purdy. I'm fine with them. I think I'm fine with them paying Brock Purdy.
Well, what is paying him?
Tua.
Which was 50.
Low 50s.
Right.
Tua deal's fine.
Okay.
I mean, the guy's eating ramen noodles, living with roommates right now. Anything's going to feel good to him. He's just poor.
Yeah. Obviously not compared with normal people, but compared to football players, definitely.
No, that's a joke that was made on the broadcast a couple years ago that I'm
But I did think,
bringing up again.
When they got to, the Christmas gifts that quarterbacks get, the linemen in particular, Jared Goff bought his guys for the Lions a giant Yeti gift pack with Wagyu steaks and stuff. And he was like, dude, there's people out here giving them Toyotas, for 5 people, or not 5, 9 or 8, whatever it is.
Tax write-off.
Maybe, yeah. But anyway, that's a significant thing. Whatever, if you're Jared Goff and you get your $100 million contract, you can afford 9 Toyotas, and you're probably getting them comped anyway as a sponsorship thing. But even if you were paying them yourself, You can afford 9 Toyotas. I don't know that Brock Purdy can.
Oh no, it's like my whole year's salary
Right.
is going to
Like he's
O-line
wiped out
picks.
with 9 Toyotas.
Yeah, so he's got to get paid. Maybe he knows. Maybe it's deferred. It's like when I get paid, I'll pay off the Toyotas.
He's maxed out the line of credit for the next couple of years. Like I am buried in credit card debt, but in a year's time, easy
Brock
street.
Purdy's got this terrible credit report, but it all gets negated as soon as he signs his deal.
He's got a credit rating of like 150, and he's got $200,000
Sorry, I had to
worth
buy
of
my
credit
O-line
card
some
debt.
gifts. I don't want the O-line mad at me.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Poor Mr. Irrelevant.
We're already getting hurt. I need to make sure those guys are happy.
Anyway, so ultimately, cause of death for the Niners, I think, is more injuries, kicking. Like, how the heck do you predict kicking stuff? That would.
But this is why you just don't draft them, and particularly not in the 3rd round, which was insanity.
Yeah,
because
but guess what? So they're going to release Jake Moody, and he's going to show up as like
Maybe.
a Falcon in a couple of years, winning an NFC championship.
But
You can't predict it.
But the problem with drafting them high is, number one, you can't predict it. And number two, you now are stuck with that guy longer than you would be if he was just an undrafted free agent that you like the look of. Because the second he missed a couple of kicks, if he was an undrafted free agent, you'd be like, hey, kid, thanks, get out of here. Now, he's a 3rd-round pick. You look like morons if you have to release him really early, so you keep giving him an opportunity. Kyle Shanahan, did you hear what they said on the broadcast about what Shanahan's, how he coaches kickers? He was like, I don't even know how to talk to kickers. I'm just like, make the kick. Like, he literally doesn't understand how to. I have no earthly idea how to communicate with Jake Moody and help him in his development. He's
Nor
like,
should you.
Just go and make the kick.
Yeah.
Kick it between the posts. How hard is that?
Do whatever you want the entire week. Show up when we call your name. Kick the ball through the upright. That's how they should be coached.
I mean, it's understandable.
Get a private coach. Get a mental coach. Do whatever you need to do. Just make the kick when we call you. That is I stand with Kyle. Like, that is exactly how you think Dan Campbell coaches him differently? You think he's got a better motivational ploy and that leads to better success?
I think George Kittle coached him better than that. Did you see what Kittle? Like, Kittle went over to him on the sideline after one of those missed kicks and was sort of the words were exchanged. You're like, look at George Kittle trying to make sure his kicker's okay, or at least trying to get him, bucked back up because he might have to make another kick. Apparently, George Kittle, that conversation went along the lines of Kittle going up to this guy and saying, do you still believe in yourself? And Moody goes, yes. And he goes, then I believe in you too. Let's go out and make the next one. That is significantly better interpersonal coaching than the head coach, Kyle Shanahan, who's like, I don't even know how to talk to this kid. Just make the damn kick.
I don't think it matters.
Of course it matters. That's everything.
I am results driven. Just because football players give each other motivational speeches. You have a motivational talk before every game, and it only works half the time. Everybody loses.
They literally had to send that guy back out later in the game to try and make another kick. You're telling me it makes no difference whatsoever if the guy actually improves his
George Kittle's
confidence and standing. Then
Kittle's conversation had nothing to do with his success.
I am saying that for a position where confidence appears to be everything and can evaporate in an instant, a head coach who has
speak to my confidence building coach.
A head coach who has literally no idea how to communicate with that guy is not a good thing.
I stand with Kyle.
My point is simply don't draft kickers high.
I agree.
The chances are they're bums.
Anything else on the Niners here?
No.
They'll be back. They'll be back. They'll be too good to be back, and I believe in Purdy in that system. It will be interesting, though, if they move on from a Debo or whatever. We'll have more as we fix every team in 5 minutes this offseason.
Thanks for watching all the way to the end of our video.
For more great content, click here to subscribe and here to watch another video. We'll see you again soon.